I had this question from a Patreon supporter last week. Hi Mallen, I've just read an article on Unheard entitled Why Putin Will Use Nuclear Weapons. The premise seems to be that he is now backed into a corner with nothing to lose and will be forced to use a tactical weapon in Ukraine. Also, that he is clearly preparing for such a move and that America will respond in kind. What's your opinion? The article is this one by retired Brigadier General Kevin Ryan, who was previously the US Defense Attaché to Moscow and Deputy Director for Strategy, Plans and Policy on the Army Staff. Which all sound like impressive credentials, although of course there are similarly credentialed analysts who do not expect Putin to use nuclear weapons. This shouldn't be a surprise. Understanding military strategy and battlefield options is one thing, but trying to mind read a relatively erratic single individual and project his actions into the future, well, that's kind of hard. Russia has already taken a number of actions that went completely against conventional military strategic thinking, and arguably they have suffered significant consequences as a result. So, using that same strategic thinking to predict the next actions, well, it's not irrelevant, but it's by no means a guaranteed successful process. The article, and indeed the question, both predate what seem to have been Russia's actions in blowing up the Kakhovka Dam with the massive flooding that has resulted. That in itself is a riposte to the idea that Putin has his back to the wall and has no strategic choices left but the use of battlefield nuclear weapons. But let's be clear, we don't know what Putin will do. He is not a predictable actor, and indeed he has in the past, as I touched upon in my video on how he sees the world, made a feature out of that very unpredictability. So I'm not going to make the presumption that Kevin Ryan makes in arguing a degree of certainty here. I will note that Ryan has been saying the same thing for the last year. So it's not as though the recent piece has been prompted by current events that has somehow tipped his analysis over the line. What I will say is that nothing in his article has persuaded me that the facts merit that much certainty. So his arguments go like this. An influx of 300,000 Russian soldiers has done little to improve Russia's performance on the ground. The forces have exhausted their ability to effectively respond to a Ukrainian escalation. Hence, he says, it is becoming clear, in my view, that the only way Russia can meet escalation with escalation is by introducing nuclear weapons. To support this, he observes that Putin has said in speeches that he sees Russia facing an existential threat, his previously stated red line for the use of nuclear weapons. And he has put the three generals responsible for the employment of tactical nuclear weapons to command the battlefield. And he says Putin has the tactical reasons to deploy nukes, namely to save Russian soldiers' lives, to shorten the war, and to destroy Ukrainian forces. The history of recent decades is that Western military planners and Russian political leaders have completely misunderstood each other's incentives and intentions. Again, something that I cover in that previous video on how Putin sees the world. And I wonder if that's not something that Ryan is guilty of here. Because Putin has shown little concern to date for the lives of Russian soldiers. The tactics used on the battlefield have been routinely careless as to the number of home casualties they cause. Likewise, right now, Russia's incentives all seem to be to lengthen the war, not to shorten it. The longer it goes on, the more Ukraine's strategic alliances with the West begin to fray, the more potentially they will collapse. Putin genuinely sees this as a proxy war with the United States, routinely makes statements and pitches demonstrably targeted at the anti-woke right constituency in America. So it's not obvious that taking the one action that would once again firmly unite the opposition against him, that is seen by him as an attractive option. Now, threatening it is certainly of advantage to him. It adds pressure to those who are susceptible to that particular game of bluff and counter-bluff, making them more likely to peel off from the larger group. Also, to my mind, Ryan dismisses too lightly the influence that China has here, which is very clear that it does not want to see nuclear weapons used. And he says simply this: claims that Putin would be dissuaded from using nuclear weapons by important allies such as China are not borne out by the war thus far. Although Putin values the support of others, he has not shied away from putting that support at risk to get what he wants. Well, maybe, but Putin is a world leader, not a military general. His terms of reference isn't only what happens on the ground in Ukraine, but what are the consequences then for his country and its place in the power hierarchy of the world. China's qualified, occasionally not very happy support has been absolutely key to his ability to even partly withstand Western sanctions and to build an alliance of countries that seek to remain neutral in the conflict. No doubt, had Moscow achieved its original goal, complete domination of Ukraine within just 3 days, China would not have felt overly anxious at his presumption. But things have gone well off plan. And since China has been steadily benefiting step by step from the status quo, seeing itself as imminently taking the global mantle from the United States, it has no strategic interest in the whole global situation being thrown into the sort of chaos that a nuclear strike would bring to it. Should Russia finally and completely alienate its most powerful ally by taking an action that at the same time shocks and motivates the opposition of much of the rest of the world, it's hard to see how Putin would expect to use the outcome of that to his own advantage. And that is a question that he asks himself when he's making decisions. It would be a sign of absolute defeat and desperation. Now, you can't count that out entirely, especially if the politics in Moscow begins to become really terminally toxic for him. But so far, Putin has been more criticised for being disinclined to take big, bold measures than the opposite. My gut instinct, for what it's worth, is that the barriers to the use of battlefield nuclear weapons remain formidable. Now, no doubt that gut instinct is fueled by the fact that, like anyone in their right mind, I do not want it to happen. If there was strong evidence to the contrary, I hope that that would override that preference, having acknowledged that it exists within me. I have been known to predict numerous things that I would prefer not to see happen on this channel, but the truth is that the signals are all contrary, and we do not know what Putin will choose to do. The end game is likely to involve some degree of political explosion or disintegration in Moscow, and that is all very much up in the air into what the consequences of that will be. All we know for sure is that nobody knows for sure, whatever their credentials, however much they might have been claiming otherwise for the last year or so. We are in a world where, once again, the use of nuclear weapons is threatened in the course of events. I am not convinced we've yet become the world where such weapons actually get used. Let's hope not, in any case. Thanks for watching this video. If you liked it, please share with anyone else you think would also enjoy it. Word of mouth is really important to us. And if you've not subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? As the saying goes, that subscribe button won't smash itself.